Killing of Charlie Kirk is really a watershed moment for the American Republic. I say it's a watershed moment because for once in a very long time, the entire conscience of the nation is affixed towards what was, I think, a rather gruesome, a rather despicable, and also a rather harrowing incident that was broadcasted to the world, and the TVs and phones of some people is still being replayed over and over again. And this is a moment where we get to decide how we can become a healthier civil society. This is a moment where we get to decide how we can beat back some of the foundational issues that bring to rise this kind of harrowing occurrence. This is a moment where we get to decide how we can fulfill the promise that our founders set down so many years ago when they founded this nation. But unfortunately, a lot of people right now are not using this as a moment to reflect or even a moment to investigate the causes of our current condition. They're using this as a moment to get angry, and merely angry, not angry in a righteous way. Because righteous anger is no sin. Righteous anger is great, and if it's directed towards sound ends, it can be a massive vehicle towards virtue. But they're using this as a moment to get angry, to get radicalized, to make surface level pronouncements about the various problems of our culture without actually investigating their causes and their origins and their foundations. They're using this as a moment to demonize each other. And they're using this as a moment to offer all kind of different synopses of what they think happened. That's not going to help us. That's not going to help anybody. That's simply going to perpetuate what is both a vicious cycle in our culture or politics that keeps us obsessed with symptoms and problems rather than keeping us invested in solutions. And so in this video, my friends, I hope not to add to the problems that are being talked about. I hope to actually help solve the problems that we're seeing manifest in our culture. And I'm going to do it on a foundational level by looking at the Kirk incident as a series, through a series of four crises that our culture is currently facing. Number one, we have a crisis of sympathy, and I'll explain what that means in a moment. Number two, we have a crisis of the heart. Number three, we have a tyranny of the passions that has so many captured and put in a chokehold. And number four, this is going to be uncomfortable, but this must be heard. We have a very hard time in this society reckoning with the category of monstrous men, people who look like humans but do not possess the same conscience or moral sense that all of us as humans possess, and therefore behave in a way that is inhuman and bestial. We have had a hard time on both sides of the aisle reckoning with that kind of person and dealing with them in a way that is more than simply calling for punishment. We can't just punish this problem. We have to eradicate the problem through awareness. And so we're going to cover it, and we're going to also go over some of the things that have happened as well over the course of this tragic endeavor. I will not do my typical intro. This is a very somber moment. I'm still myself processing what happened, and it's really just unfortunate that a mother and two kids now no longer have their husband or their father. So everyone, I'm Christian Watson, and you're watching Pensive Politics, a show where we deliver philosophical analysis of culture, society, and news from a civic conservative perspective. Thank you so much for being here. Before I get started, let me just say one thing. I think the conversation that's a little bit more fruitful, but I think also concerning, is how people have tried to diagnose this and the aftermath of this unfortunate event. Some people have tried to say we need to talk about the problem of political violence without first asking the question, what kind of culture produces and makes possible political violence in the first place? Then going one level below that and asking what kind of behavior, what kind of pattern of behavior produces the culture that enables political violence, because a culture is simply a systematized form of behavior in the form of customs, traditions, and habits. So beneath culture is behavior. Then the more important question, the third question that we should be asking, is what truths or what principles or what deviations from the nature of man produces that kind of behavior, which enables the culture for political violence to happen, because beneath behavior is action. And to understand action, you have to investigate man's nature. And to investigate man's nature, you have to delve into the truths, principles, and ideas that constitute him, his passions, his principles, his intuitions, his mind, his heart, everything that makes man suitable for society. You have to delve into that. So this is not necessarily a problem of political violence per se. This is a problem that warrants philosophical investigation. This is a crisis of the human being. This is a crisis of our nature. And that's where we have to begin. This is the foundational approach I was talking about. That's where we have to begin if you actually want to get down to fixing this problem. I'm tired of having to deal with these shallow takes because they keep us distracted when we have people dying. We have people losing their lives for speaking their conscience, and we never ask ourselves, well, what is the state of our conscience in society? We never ask ourselves that. Why? Because it's not sexy or fashionable, that's why. Because some people would rather keep you perpetually mad, perpetually angry, asking for a civil war. So here's the thing about a civil war. Do you want more husbands and dads to die? Because a civil war is exactly what that would cause. Yeah, I saw several folks in the wake of Charlie's death saying, civil war, civil war, civil war. What's wrong with you? Someone like that dies and your immediate reaction is to say, oh my, let's predict the future where more people will die. That's not an attitude of someone who builds. That's the attitude of someone who wishes to see destruction wrought upon us, upon the whole society. And that most certainly is a problem. That is a sign that you should not be listening to that person, in my personal opinion. Another question that's been asked is, how can we coexist with people? Many of us in the right have been asking, how do we coexist with folks that want to see us dead? Without actually asking the question, is coexistence actually the aim of society? Or is it existing amid tension? See, American society has never been a perfect place of harmonious coexistence throughout its history. We've always been a place where we have existed despite our differences, but there was tension due to differences. You go all the way back through American history, whether it be in the divisions between the rural agrarian South and the industrial North, whether it be in the divisions between the mostly Protestant Christian country and the Catholic minority at some point, or whether it be in the divisions between the Mormons at the beginning of their religion, who they were considered to be very odd and very out there, and the majority Christian country, which essentially told them to stop doing things that were incumbent to their religion in order to get a state called Utah. I mean, there's so many different instances where Americans have not harmoniously coexisted, as the slogan says, but there has been tension amid their coexisting. And yet, that tension is what actually made America exceptional. Because every pluralistic project is going to have some razor-sharp edges in the process of formation. Every society is going to have distinctions and differences. The tension is what makes us better. The tension is what challenges us. The tension is what pushes us towards our heights. The tension of existence. Cicero said, a life without toil is empty. The tensions of society are the toil that give meaning to this whole experiment we call America. So no, we can't coexist at all. We exist amid tension. The question is, how much tension are we going to accept, and in which direction is tension going to go? There ought to be some tension. There will always be some tension. But the tension should obviously be kept on a certain level. And how to do that is what I'm going to actually address next. So as I mentioned, my friends, there are 4 cardinal crises that I believe produced the culture that enabled Charlie Kirk to unfortunately lose his life in this way. It's a crisis of sympathy, number 1. Sympathy, my friends, is, as Adam Smith would say, a principle that regulates our passions in regards to how we see other people. This is distinct from empathy. Empathy is when you try to get deep into your passions and then see the world entirely through the viewpoint of somebody else, with no regulating feature or no barrier or no corrective mechanism to actually say, hold on, Be careful here. Sympathy is where you like you're in a submarine going into the ocean, where you have a much more careful and curated approach to understanding your fellow man without getting too deep into the wells of your passion. Your passion is still there. It's actually at the base of your sympathy, but you're not going to get too deep into it because you want to make sure you're not going to be compromised by it in your thinking. Well, we have a crisis of sympathy. Because to have a culture of sympathy, you must first have a culture of prudence. And our culture today, especially as it relates to political conversation, is one where prudence is rejected. Prudence being sound thinking, the application of reason and first principles, and most importantly, the exercise of conscience, which also includes our positive sentiments, which actually increase and enhance our social affections. Our prudence has been limited as well by our digitized age where everything moves at lightning speed, where people are reduced to slogans and tribes and vain ideas, and where public figures are not seen as humans with their own kind of families and their own kind of loves and desires, but instead they're seen as mascots for a certain political ideology. When you have these set of concepts governing your society, you're going to have a crisis of sympathy because the human being has been annihilated and in this place has been put things that are impersonal. Sympathy requires the personal, and in order to have an understanding of the personal, you must have prudence. But we live in a very imprudent culture, which I think the reaction to Kirk's death unfortunately showed. So in order to have that sympathy, we don't need to simply humanize people. That's one thing. Because you can humanize someone too much and in that sense lose essence of their flaws, right? But we have to have a culture where we think both with our minds and our hearts, and we let our minds and our hearts work together in harmony to figure things out, not work against each other in tension, which will only produce chaos. That's part of this problem we're having. Number two, the crisis of the heart. So if we have a problem of sympathy, then that means we also have a problem governing the contents of our heart. The contents of our heart. The heart is the seat of your passions, emotions, and your reflection and your ability to understand what is right and wrong. Our moral sense, which is what tells us what is right and wrong, good or bad, before we even think about it. Within the marrows of our soul, that is what the heart really contains in the moral world. So we had to have a culture of the heart, where instead of the heart being tyrannized by the vicious passions that man has in his soul, whether it be his desire for vengeance, anger, impatience, all these things that constitute human nature, the culture of the heart is actually going to help cultivate positive passions that influence our overall behavior. But we have a crisis of the heart in this country because there are forces trying to make your vicious passions, your anger, your vengeance bubble up and then go into how you think about how society and politics ought to be ordered. Why do you think so many folks are bloodlusted by this? Why do you think so many folks are calling for the sword to hammer down on people and destroy their enemies? Part of it is because the heart is in crisis and we have been accustomed to react to things, to consume things by reacting to things rather than to proactively think and investigate things. And that is putting us in a posture where dangerous behavior, where assassination culture, where political violence, I don't care what you call it, becomes more commonplace. The heart must be governed virtuously, my friends. But we're not hearing the influencers talk about this. And part of this crisis of the heart, this lack of the culture of the heart, this anathema, is, as I mentioned before, the tyranny of passion married with ideologies that thrive upon it. When you have a worldview that incorrectly assesses the whole of human nature, which is leftism, most leftist worldviews, whether it be progressivism, whether it be socialism, regardless, that just get the nature of man entirely wrong. You're going to have a worldview that cannot correct against the excesses of man. That means his worst elements and his most overindulged elements. In fact, in some cases, they'll enable the excesses of man by placing the blame for things in society or in things beyond his control, like systems of power or whatever. And so when you have already a crisis of the heart, but you marry that with dangerous ideologies, you're going to get people that act out of not just ignorance, but passionate, furious ignorance. And I'd rather somebody be merely ignorant than to be passionately and furiously ignorant, because if somebody is passionately and furiously ignorant, you're not going to be able to tell them anything. And that is going to compromise their conscience. And it's also going to make their moral sense subject to corrosion. Because if I'm passionately and furiously ignorant, and my moral sense is actually located where my passions come from, which is my heart, then that means my vicious passions, my desire for vengeance or my desire for bloodlust, can actually overtake what should actually regulate my passion, which is the moral sense. It can overtake that and define that, and make me redefine what is good or bad in my own terms, according to the passions in the worldview I now hold. And that can then justify evil. And this is where I think we get to my last point, at least in this regard. It's the problem of monstrous man. There are certain kinds of people, as I mentioned before, that look human, that have a human frame, whose eyes have eyes, face, everything. But inside they're not human. Because their conscience is gone, or it's blunted, and their moral sense did not exist, or it's blunted. And every human being has an internal sense of right and wrong and has a conscience to reinforce that, but there are people who do not. Some of them are sociopaths. Others are people who have actually been drug addicted and whose minds have been worn down by high drugs. Others are people who are high on imagination. Think of Friedrich Nietzsche, where their imaginations and their lust for power and their wanderlust, so to speak, drives them into a place where they cannot respect the demands of real life. They can only respect the demands of their idealisms. They can be completely sane, but driven insane by their own unwillingness to be grounded in reality and be grounded in what is good and what is true. And there are all kinds of other people who fit this category of monstrous men. It's very easy to say we need to institutionalize a crazy person on the street who is slurring words or who is carrying a knife and killing people. It's much harder to say we have to institutionalize or lock up the politician who is sending drone strikes into villages full of children, who is a monstrous man because his conscience and his moral sense are gone. It's much harder to say that we should lock up the principal or institutionalize the principal who is for years of the school used his power and influence to dominate the wills of those who work under him and to extort those who work under him within the limits of the system. Again, monstrous man, no moral sense, no conscience. Until we begin to take the idea of monstrous men more seriously, I'm afraid we're not going to talk about violence. Because one of the best ways to prevent violence is to have a culture of the heart where beneficence and goodwill are emphasized over vengeance and viciousness. But if someone is in the category of monstrous man, they don't have the ability, either never had or don't have anymore, to feel goodwill or beneficence because they are so distorted and marred by the sickness of being monstrous men. We have to address this. And this is where the sword actually will be useful. Because the sword will actually be able to stop monstrous men, but the sword won't be able to correct all the effects of monstrous men. And this, my friends, is exactly why I think the cause that so many people have undertaken to go ahead and crush their enemies, crush the left or whatever, are misguided. Because the sword will never fix an impoverished conscience. The sword will never fix an impoverished conscience. The sword can stop the effects of an impoverished conscience. The sword can stop someone from going into a school and shooting it up. The sword can stop someone from stealing things. The sword can stop someone from harming another egregiously. But it can never fix what causes that. And I kind of want to draw a distinction here before I get to my closing point between monstrousness and meanness. Because a lot of the leftists that are reacting to Charlie's death with glee, many people are calling them evil or demon-possessed. Well, I'm actually sorry to say this, but they're actually all too human. It's very easy to call people who behave in an inhuman way demon-possessed or put them under some kind of supernatural category, but in fact, they're all too human. because there is a vicious nature within man that, in absence of his moral sense and his conscience being at their heights, is unleashed for ruin to be wrought upon people and society. And that part of man, that vicious part, is all too human. And to say that it's a demon or some kind of supernatural category is to place the responsibility and the accountability for the words and actions of that person outside of them into some speculative abstract territory, and therefore give them a pass for their malevolent behavior. No, I'm not going to do that. Humanity has a dark side, a vicious side. And society exists in spite of it, in antagonism to it. And it will only continue to exist if we understand the terms upon which we should describe these problems in the first place. The goal is not to crush your enemies. The goal is not to crush the left or whatever. The goal is to instead eviscerate the principle that enables your enemies to be your enemy in the first place. And that is going to require creating a culture where the manners and ideas of the vicious, of the monstrous, of the revolutionary, of the violently revolutionary, not the righteously revolutionary like America was, but the violently revolutionary, do not flourish in the first place. And that is going to be a bottom-up approach. Not just a bottom-up approach, but actually an inward-out approach. Because all cultural change doesn't just happen on the bottom, it happens from within. First, the culture of the heart is created. First, sympathy and beneficence, goodwill, fidelity. These become active principles in man through his ability to reflect in his moral education. And then these flow out and come out and form a healthy and positive culture. And then that bleeds up to how every domain of our society is governed, how our entertainment is governed, how our political order is governed, how our everything, our taste, our passions, our culture of the heart, they govern how everything else in society happens. But until we fix inside, nothing else matters, my friends. This is not a sexy message, I get it. I'm not saying, go ahead, we got to go crush the leftists, because guess what? Viciousness begets viciousness. Antagonism begets antagonism. What we do need to do, we need to take very seriously monstrousness in this society, and the sword can and should be used to fix that. But what we shouldn't do is we shouldn't mistake the sword as the panacea for all of our problems. Because society arises from man's sociability, which is the natural desire, his natural desire for society hidden in his heart, which then becomes social interaction. And that then creates everything we see around us right now. Antagonism is an enemy of that. And so I'm not going to seek to stoke more antagonism where it need not be stoked. So where's the roadmap ahead, my friends? The roadmap ahead is going to be a combination of a few things. Number one, we have to emphasize moral education more in this country. Not just doing the right thing, but how we know what the right thing is and how those principles are located in the foundations of man's nature. That's number one. Number two, it's going to be, most importantly, an affirmative, convicted, grounded, direct approach to the issue of monstrous man, to those who have no conscience and no moral sense, who would seek to harm other people, innocent people, for reasons that are unjust. We must deal with them in a way that is going to be all pervasive and that is going to make sure they are stopped before their machinations can manifest. Also, we must change the way we communicate about things. We must stop being so taken in by spectacle, stop being so taken in by simplistic explanations, and ask ourselves what lies beneath all of the problems in our society today. And how can I, as a person in my own single capacity, go ahead and move ahead to address these problems in my own community? And most importantly, my friends, this is going to be perhaps the most important thing I say. We must stop viewing the world with a totalizing lens. You must realize that more often than not, even though there are fringes on both sides, even though there are radicals on both sides, especially on the radical left, and by the way, as I mentioned, I think that all monstrousness, all violence and viciousness ought to be confronted with the sword, ought to be confronted and stopped before it manifests. But even though there are so many different variants of savagery that exist in our current cultural space, just some meanness, which is what we're seeing a lot of happen, can actually be addressed. It can actually be helped. Because meanness, my friends, is just a sign that the moral sense is blunted and weakened. And not only that, but it's also a sign that that person who is being mean is vulnerable and or does not want to be vulnerable and is exposed to certain kinds of influences that feed their ability, their desire to hide from their own vulnerability, from reckoning for themselves. This can be helped. A lot of what we're seeing absolutely can be helped. But it's going to require charitability on both sides. It's going to require a patience, a long-suffering, a meekness about ourselves. And most importantly, it's going to require not viewing everyone on the other side or whatever side as an enemy or as violent. It's going to require viewing every mean person, every vicious person who's not monstrous. This is the difference between meanness and monstrosity. Every mean person as an opportunity, not as a problem to be dealt with through civil war or whatever. Charlie Kirk left a very enduring legacy. One of courage, one of purpose, one of defiance to the orthodox standards of his day that sought to keep him in a place when he was just a young man of subservience and servility to those who had already come before him and were much older. He defied all of that. And I myself am grateful for his example. But I also understand that this moment is a moment that goes beyond any of us and goes towards what kind of future, what kind of country, what kind of people we want to be. And in the memory of Charlie Kirk, in the memory of his courage and his effort to build up American civilization through patriotism, through dedication, through passion, through community building, and reference and dedication to all of that, it is going to be our duty to be architects of the kind of civilization we want to see in America, to continue and carrying the torch that he picked up, that was first lit in 1776, so many years ago. We won't do that by driving ourselves into narrow-mindedness or spectacle or speculation or anger or blind passion. We'll do this by channeling righteous passion towards just ends, by seeking a better country and a more forthright hand towards all of those that would seek to destroy it, and a charitable hand to those who may not seek to destroy it, but are behaving in a way that is fundamentally uncharitable towards us. I believe we have the ability for something special to arise here, my friends. I believe we have the ability, even in the face of this tragedy, to forge a pathway forward. But this is all going to count on us and what we as people do. I know as for me, I'm going to keep trucking along. This is a very serious matter. And if you want to be part of the solution, I would humbly encourage you to join what I call the Pensive cohort, which is a collection of young people who are going to study some of the key thinkers in American history and Western civilization, like Hugo Grotius and Germain de Stael and Lord Kames and others, many of whom you may have not heard of before. And we're going to take the principles embodied by them and embodied in the founding of our country and push them into the future to create a better civil society, a more philosophically grounded civil society, and a better political order. I believe this kind of thing is what's going to actually help the solution to these problems come about. Over the next few days and weeks and months, you're going to hear a lot of different things. I would just encourage all of you, please, keep your hearts guarded, keep your minds guarded, watch what you hear, and keep your eyes fixed on solutions. And keep your mind far away from blind rage. Let any passion you feel be righteous and directed towards solutions, not directed towards conflict. My friends, like, share, comment, subscribe. Hope all of you are coping with this well. If any of you need to talk to me, reach out to me. Comment, email me. I'm going to be available. My friends, study history, study philosophy, remain morally convicted, and please stay pensive. Bye, my friends.